Welcome back, everyone. This is D.A Sports. I'm your host, D.A.S.A.S.I.E. Thank you. This is episode number 33. Now, in today's episode, we are going to recap my picks from NFL week number 17. Then, of course, as per usual, at the beginning of the week, we're going to give you my top 5 and worst 5 NFL rankings after week number 17. So let's get into it. Okay, so for starters, we are going to recap my pick 3 from last week. Now, this week I did go 2-1 as a part of my pick 3, so not perfect, unfortunately, this week, but still more positive than negative. It brings my total record on the season to 36-12 on my pick 3. So still definitely a great record overall. Still keeping the ball rolling for the most part. Now for each game individually, the first game in my pick 3 was the Tampa Bay Buccaneers to beat the Carolina Panthers. Now the Tampa Bay Buccaneers were favored to win by 8 points. And I said that I could see Carolina playing well enough to where it could be close and then not be close late. Well, I was completely wrong. I was right about the pick that Tampa Bay would win. I was wrong about the game being close. Tampa Bay did win the game 48-14, completely smashed Carolina from jump. Baker Mayfield played excellent, definitely helping Tampa Bay and their momentum leading into the playoff push. They're now in position, since Atlanta lost, that if Tampa Bay wins their last game of the season, week 18, then they win the NFC South and they go directly into the playoffs, probably as the 4 seed. So definitely a positive for them. Mike Evans, being his normal consistent self, was productive. I think Baker Mayfield finished with 5 touchdowns on the day, which is just spectacular. McMillan really stepped up in this game. I think he had a couple touchdowns for himself. They basically just blitzed Carolina from jump and looked like a well-oiled machine. It's surprising in the sense that looking forward as far as playoff alignment, most people assume that whoever came out of the NFC South was going to be one and done. But I think that it's not going to be so easy, especially if it comes down to Detroit ending up in that 5 spot and Tampa Bay in that 4 spot. Because even though on paper you would think, oh, Detroit's a better team, people don't remember that Tampa Bay actually beat Detroit already this season. And they beat them earlier in the season when Detroit was more healthy. So if it lines up where Detroit loses this last game of the season against Minnesota and they fall to the 5th seed, and Tampa Bay finishes as the 4th seed, and then Detroit has to go into Tampa Bay for this first wild card playoff game, it is not going to be an automatic that Detroit gets the win, especially with the way Detroit's defense has looked and the way Tampa's offense has looked. So Detroit better hope and pray that their defense gets it together, or at least they win week 18 so that they get the 1 seed in the bye, because I definitely don't think that Tampa Bay is a team they want to see. Now, in the other way around, if Minnesota ends up being the 5th seed, I feel like they probably feel like they match up better, but nonetheless, I don't think anybody really wants to play Tampa Bay, so it'll be interesting to see how it all plays out. But as far as this week's pick, I got the pick right, and they won easily. Now, the next pick as a part of my pick 3 was the Indianapolis Colts to beat the New York Giants. And this was the one that I was wrong about. The Colts were favored by 7 points. Now, as you know, all the games that I put in my pick 3, I always put them there because I say that these are games that, for whatever reason, I could see going either way. And unfortunately, this is one that went the opposite way, even though I was thinking more so that Indianapolis had to win this game for a couple reasons. One, the Giants had the worst record in the league, and they were in line to get the number 1 seed. Now, I always say that obviously players on the field are always going to play to win the game. You're always going to try your best. You don't want to, kind of give half of an effort in anything because, for one, that's how you get hurt. And for two, your effort shows on tape, which will determine whether or not you're back on the team next year, or if you're not on the team, if another team wants to pick you up. So, as a player on the field, you're always going to give 110%. Now, from an owner's perspective or GM's perspective, they had to be kicking themselves that they won, that the Giants won this game. And then on the other end of it, I felt like the Colts were going to win because they were still in playoff contention. And now with this loss to who was going into this week the worst team in the league, they're now out of playoff contention. And I said that, it was a little worrisome that Anthony Richardson wasn't playing and Joe Flacco was going to start, but I felt like his experience was going to help them through. And overall, offensively, they didn't do too bad. They scored 33 points, but their defense was just atrocious and gave up 45. So they were favored to win by 7. They lost 33-45, which is a 12-point spread. So huge swing from what was expected to what was the outcome. The Giants hadn't scored this much all season. They hadn't looked this productive offensively all season, which is the reason why I picked against them. And they proved me wrong. Drew Lock looked phenomenal. Malik Neighbors looked phenomenal. The Giants look like a team that all of the most ambitious Giants fans hoped they would be this season, which they clearly weren't. So the Colts got a loss. Their season is a wrap. I mean, I don't think anybody really had high hopes for them anyway, but they were still holding on to a playoff chance, and now they aren't, and they lose. And this was my one of my picks that I got wrong during this pick 3. Now, the last pick as a part of my pick 3 was the Monday night game, which was just last night. That was the Detroit Lions to beat the San Francisco 49ers. Detroit was favored to win by 3.5, and they did beat the spread. The final score was 40-34, so they won by 6 points. Now, this game was back and forth. It was great. It was a great game. One of the best games of the week for sure. There was a lot of intrigue going into this game because San Francisco, even though they haven't met their expectations of where most people thought they would be, I, being one of them, expected them to make it all the way to the conference finals and lose, but nonetheless, I expected them to make it to the conference finals. They're not even going to make it to the playoffs, so very underwhelming for them, but a lot of big stars on their team. They still play with a lot of pride, and they still wanted to come out and get this win. I also think that they looked at it like if they could show that they could beat Detroit, that they realized like, oh, we're still a good team. We just didn't make it because of our injuries that we had during the middle of the season. But unfortunately for them, even though they were winning for most of the game, they weren't able to hold on to it. Detroit came out and just kept the pressure on them all game. Their offense was seemingly unstoppable. Now, Detroit's defense, as I kind of mentioned earlier, has a lot to be worried about because they've given up a lot of points in the last month, and I get it, with so many injuries that they've had, it's kind of inevitable that you're just going to suffer some, but the defense did come up with some huge plays at the end of the game. They got 2 interceptions from one safety, they got a crucial sack from another safety, so Detroit definitely came out big. A lot of people were saying that Detroit should have rested players this week since this game didn't really change anything as far as what was going to be for seeding, since it all really comes down to the game this upcoming week with Minnesota, where the winner gets the 1 seed and the loser ends up as the 5th seed. But nonetheless, it's not the Detroit Lions way, which I commend them for. You can't play scared. You can't play with the idea of, oh, well, somebody might get injured, because people get injured in practice. People get injured not in practice, just at home, slipping and falling. So as a player in that kind of mentality, I feel like, look, unless you're like legitimately have like a really bad injury that's on the brink of getting worse, then yeah, you play, and you play to win a game. You don't want that kind of negative momentum of coming off a loss and then trying to go into the biggest game of the season to get a win against a division rival. So I totally commend them for playing, even though the announcers seemed to not be able to get over it throughout the game. I think it got mentioned like 5 times in the first quarter and a half of the game about them being worried about somebody getting hurt. And I'm like, you just can't play like that. So definitely commend Detroit for getting the job done. They definitely look explosive. It's going to be interesting to see how they do going forward, because obviously their production offensively says that they can play with anyone. but their lack of production defensively says anybody can play with them. So we'll see how it pans out going forward. I'm probably going to use their game against Minnesota as one of my last pick threes for next episode. But for now, this is where they are, and they got the win as a part of this week's pick three. Now, the next game in my picks was my lock of the week. This week's lock of the week was the Buffalo Bills to beat the New York Jets. Buffalo was favored to win by 9.5, and I was correct. So I was right this week, 1-0 in my lock of the week. Now 13-3 on the season for a lock of the week. Great record. I believe I'm on a 12-week win streak for lock of the week. So it's literally doing exactly as the name says it is. It's a lock. So if I say lock of the week, this team is going to win. And they held up their end of the bargain. Like I said, they were favored to win by 9.5. They won 40-14. So 26 points difference. Complete domination. And the Jets, I mean, we've said from weeks ago that the Jets season was pretty much a bust and a huge disappointment. This game was more of the same. And then especially with the whole thing, the press conferences after the game, where I guess Aaron Rodgers was saying to his coach, they're like, hey, I guess I should come out the game since we're getting blown out 40-0 or whatever. And I'm just like, who does that? Like, you've got 2 games left in the season. You're already out of playoff contention. You have been a huge disappointment for the team. Like, the team looked at you thinking you were going to get them over the hump and make them a contender. I even predicted that the Jets were going to win their division this year. I was terribly wrong. I expected more from Aaron Rodgers. Most Jets fans expected more. Matter of fact, I think everybody expected more from Aaron Rodgers, and he's definitely been a letdown. Not saying that all of their losses are solely on him, but his production is still part of the makeup that's why they are what they are. So for him to kind of ask to be pulled out because they're getting blown out, when part of the reason they're getting blown out is because of his lack of production, and it's just really kind of sad, like, and disappointing. You know, everybody got on Anthony Richardson for tapping himself out for a play or two because he was exhausted. I feel like that's not as bad as Aaron Rodgers tapping himself out because they're losing. Like, that's worse. That's like mental toughness over physical toughness. So definitely not a good look for the Jets. As it goes for the Bills, they are locked into the 2 seed, I believe, coming into this upcoming week's games. Josh Allen is just going to take like the first snap and then go out, and they're pretty much going to sit since they can't go up or down in the seeding. And so that'll be a nice rest for them going into wild card week. But they were definitely dominant in their last full going out regular season game of the season. So definitely looking forward to seeing what they do come playoff time. Now, the last pick of my picks this week was the underdog pick of the week. I said previously that I didn't have much faith in underdog pick of the week because of the shorter slate of games for Sunday. Since there were so many games during the week, there wasn't a lot to pick from. The game that I did pick was the Dallas Cowboys to upset the Philadelphia Eagles. Dallas was favored to lose by 7.5. Not only did they not come close to that spread, they got obliterated. They lost 41-7. Now, I'm 0-1 this week in my underdog pick of the week. 4-12 on the year. As I mentioned before, these are always going to be the hardest ones to get because they're favored to lose by more than 3 points for a reason. This one was 7.5. The only reason I had a little bit of faith that they might be able to pull off the upset was because Jalen Hurts was injured, so he's not playing. And Dallas's defense seemed like they were playing a little better in recent weeks. Well, neither of those things made a difference because not only did Jalen Hurts not being in change anything, Kenny Pickett went out late in the game, and their third-string quarterback, whose name I don't even know, I've never heard of him before, he scored 2 touchdowns. The third-string quarterback for the Eagles beat the Dallas Cowboys by himself. Think about that. The Cowboys scored 7 points. The third-string quarterback for the Eagles scored 14. Like, that's ridiculous. So they lost 41-7. I did see an interview from Micah Parsons after the game saying something about, oh, they lost because of 5 big plays, and if you take away the scoreboard, like, they're in the game. And I'm like, if you take away the scoreboard, what? Does that make any sense to anyone? If you take away the scoreboard? Why are we playing the game if we're taking away the scoreboard? Like, they have scoreboards even in like kids sports. My my son, for example, plays flag football. He's in second grade. Guess what? They keep score. You know why they keep score? So they know who won. So they know which team is outplaying the other. You know, if you give up 5 big plays and all 5 of those big plays are touchdowns and you only score 1 touchdown for the game, that doesn't mean you played a good game. That means you lost. That means you sucked. You got beat down. So this whole idea that he tried to put out like, oh, we played really well, we just gave up big plays, probably the stupidest thing I've heard all year. Maybe next to something else that's heard, ironically, out of the same organization, was when Jerry Jones said he was going all in at the beginning of the season, and then he really did nothing. So it was basically all out, like the team is from the playoff contention. So yeah, that was ridiculous. Dallas had no chance in this game. I was definitely wrong in this underdog pick of the week. I won't be picking them at all in this next week's games. I don't know if I'm going to be picking them at all next season. We'll see. Because from what I've seen from the organization, I can't say that there's any hope of them getting things fixed. So, but for this week, yes, definitely wrong. Philadelphia smacked them around, and it was a good win for them. Horrible loss for Dallas. Now, to finish up this episode, of course, we got to get into my top 5 and worst 5 NFL rankings after week 17. So, to start it off, of course, we got to go at number 1 with the Kansas City Chiefs. The Chiefs right now are 15-1, and as I mentioned before, they're getting better and better and better. And I always said from earlier on in the season, while they were having all these close wins, that people seem to forget how many injuries they dealt with. Did they have as many injuries as Detroit? No. But probably next to Detroit, as far as significant injuries to their production, they probably had the most. You got to remember, they lost the person they signed in the offseason that was intended to be their number 1 receiver. They lost their actual number 1 receiver that they had coming over from last season in the beginning of the season. They lost their starting running back in the beginning of the season. Then they lost another receiver that they got midseason for 3 weeks after they got him. And so they've had so many injuries, it's no wonder why their offense hasn't been productive. But as these guys have started to come back, now we're seeing more and more production. They scored more and more points. Honestly, there was another thing I noticed. I had mentioned like a few weeks ago, they were on a list of teams that hadn't scored 30 points. But then I was looking at some of the recaps from games earlier in the season. They did score 30 points. They scored 30 against Carolina. But anyway, regardless, this past week they beat the Pittsburgh Steelers in Pittsburgh on Christmas Day. The game wasn't close, complete domination. Chris Jones didn't play and the defense was still active. They had 5 sacks in the game. So that leads into them securing the number 1 seed. They don't have to play any of the stars week 18. Then they get a bye in the first round of the playoffs. So you got 2 weeks rest for the team that has been banged up, one of the most banged up teams in the league, who's been dominating and winning games all season, the most wins out of all the teams in the league. It's a scary proposition for other teams, especially knowing that every team in the AFC has to go through Arrowhead in order to try to get to the Super Bowl. So good luck. Now, as far as the next team on the list, I got to go at number 2 with the Minnesota Vikings. The Minnesota Vikings are 14-2. I've been talking about Minnesota since the middle of the season, talking about how nobody was respecting them, how they were going under the radar, and nobody was really talking about how much they're really in the mix. Now here we get to week 18, and everybody realizes, wait, Minnesota only has 2 losses? Wait, they're tied for the best record in the NFC? Wait, if they win, they go in as the number 1 seed? Yes, that's right, the same Minnesota Vikings. Sam Darnold-led Minnesota Vikings. Now, I'll admit, I didn't have Minnesota being this good in the season. Matter of fact, I'm pretty sure preseason I picked Minnesota to finish last in the division. Now, granted, part of the reason why I thought they'd finish last in the division is because I thought they were going to start their rookie quarterback. And out of the 2 teams in that division starting rookie quarterbacks, I'm like, well, they're starting the worst of the two rookie quarterbacks, so they'll probably finish last. That didn't happen. The rookie quarterback got hurt preseason, out for the season. In comes journeyman Sam Darnold, and Sam Darnold looks like Baker Mayfield. Baker Mayfield has been the one to kind of lead this push of quarterbacks landing in the right spot and showing what their actual potential really is. Sam Darnold has played excellent. Probably, easily a top 10 quarterback this year based on his play. So, with that being said, and with the way the defense flies around, Minnesota is going to strike fear in a lot of teams. So, as of right now, they definitely deserve to be the number 2 team. They probably one of the most complete teams all in all. The only reason I didn't move them to 1 is because they don't have the experience that the Chiefs have of being productive week after week and in the playoffs. So, and they obviously they don't have as good of a quarterback situation, but they definitely deserve to be number 2 right now. Coming in at number 3, I got to go with the Buffalo Bills. As I mentioned, as a part of my lock of the week, the Bills were completely dominant this week against the Jets. They really bounced back because they had a division game the week before against the Patriots where they looked shaky to start, and then they finally figured it out. They kind of rolled that second half momentum of that game into the beginning of the Jets game and then never looked back. So Buffalo is rolling into the playoffs with good momentum. They're going to get a little bit of break this week, week 18, since it doesn't mean anything for their seeding. Hopefully for their sake, that helps them out, get ready for the playoffs, and we'll see how it goes. As of right now, they definitely deserve to be number 3. At number 4, I had to go with the Detroit Lions. The Detroit Lions are 14-2. I had to drop Detroit, even though they did get the win against San Francisco, because I really just don't like what I'm seeing from their defense. Their offense, like I said, is completely explosive. They can score every single time they get the ball. But you're just not going to be able to beat really good teams like that week in and week out, which is why I think this Week 18 game is going to be very telling as far as how they mesh as a team and how every facet of the team has to be productive to win. If they can win the way they've been winning against Minnesota, then I'll shut up and say, you know what, it doesn't matter, and they'll be able to get the job done. But if they struggle or if they get blown out in this game, it's really going to open people's eyes to what their ceiling might be as the playoffs get going. So we'll see where they at, but as of right now, they deserve to be at the 4th spot. And then bringing in the 5th spot, obviously I got to go with the Philadelphia Eagles. The Eagles are 13-3. Now, before Jalen Hurts went out, I had the Eagles as the number 1 team in the league. And if Jalen Hurts is 100%, I might put them back at number 1. But because Jalen Hurts is now out 2 games, and even though it was just a concussion, so all signs should point to him being ready come playoff time, you just don't know nowadays. The way, concussion treatment is treated nowadays versus back in the day, it's a lot more cautious. So you don't know what the real impact is going to be on his health and, just how he prepares and things like that. If he's 100%, Philadelphia easily could be number 1. But based on the uncertainty of his health, I have to leave them at 5 for right now. They don't deserve to drop out of the top 5, but they can't go ahead of some of these other teams who, if the Eagles don't have Hurts, there's no way the Eagles are beating any of these other top 4 teams. Now, with him, they can. So we'll see how it goes as we get into the playoffs. But for right now, they deserve to be in this 5th spot. Now, now for the worst 5, bringing it in at 28, I have to go with the Jacksonville Jaguars. Now, Jacksonville is now 4-12. 2 of their most recent wins were against Tennessee Titans, who you'll see mentioned later in this list. So even though they are coming off a win, they're coming off of beating a bad team, so you don't really go up that much. But at least from a fan's perspective, you can look at it like, okay, we do have some potential. Mac Jones has looked decent in replacing Trevor Lawrence since he's been out. So there's that. You have at least a solid backup or maybe even a starter if – no, they can't start him because they just paid Trevor Lawrence. So it's definitely a backup. And I don't think Mac Jones has done enough to get like a starting job somewhere else. But having a quality backup is very important. Trust me, as a Chiefs fan, I know we have had several years where we've had to have a quality backup come in during important games, either in the regular season or in the playoffs. So quality backup spots are to be cherished. But for right now, Jacksonville deserves to be at 28. Then at number 29, I got to go with the New Orleans Saints. Now, the Saints haven't been in this bottom five in a while. They're currently 5-11, so they have the best record out of all the teams in this bottom five. But they have to go in this space. They just lost to the Raiders, and it wasn't close. They got beat down by the Raiders. And this is part of what I was talking about in previous weeks about the Raiders being in this bottom five, but feeling like Antonio Pierce should keep his job because they play hard. And they showed that they can play hard too, even against, terrible teams like the Saints. The Saints' offenses looked just awful. Spencer Rattler looks like a college quarterback, and without good quarterback play, as the Raiders know firsthand, you can't really expect to do much. I think the Saints have combined for like less than 30 points in the last 2 weeks. Like, I think it's actually even less than that. It might be less than 20 points in the last 2 weeks. So, terrible offense from the Saints. Their defense is trying to hold on, but you can only do so much. So, they deserve to be in this bottom five, and they're at 29 right now. Now, coming in at number 30, we got to go with the Cleveland Browns. Cleveland Browns are 3-13. DTR has been the starter the last 2 games. He has shown signs here and there, especially like with his mobility. If you look at a lot of the top-end quarterbacks nowadays, a lot of them have great mobility so that when the pocket breaks down, they can scamper and get yardage here or there. Obviously, not everybody's Lamar Jackson. Let me be clear. Nobody's Lamar Jackson, right? To where that scamper can turn into a 60-yard run and they're outrunning everybody on the field. But being able to get 5 yards here, 10 yards here is really important, and DTR has shown that ability to do. He's not at the spot where he's reading defenses and throwing people open and things like that, but he's still young. He still hasn't even made like a full season of starts yet. And based on the contract situation with Watson, he probably is not going to make that come next season either. But it's a good learning experience for him. Unfortunately, as a team, as a whole, they're still bad, so they have to be stuck at number 30 right now. Now, coming in at number 31 is the New York Giants. The Giants are 3-13. They got a win this week, so they moved up from the cellar where they've been for the last month or so. And great for the players because no player wants to be on a losing team. Sucks for the organization, as I mentioned earlier, because they had the number 1 pick locked up, and now they dropped. So I believe right now they dropped to number 4. Crazy part is that if they win this week, in week 18, then they could drop to like anywhere between 8 and 10, which is kind of crazy that they were holding on to the number 1 spot and now could be drafted somewhere between 8 and 10 if they were to win in week 18. So overall, they're still a bad team. Yes, they beat the Colts, but the Colts aren't really that good. And the Colts were playing with their backup quarterback. So you can only move them up so much. I did move them up 1 spot, but they still deserve to be at the bottom. This is the most production we've seen out of their team, probably in the last couple years. So still nothing to look forward to. I mean, I guess the one positive they could hold on to is that maybe they keep Drew Lock next season. And maybe since they're dropping in draft picks, they, if they don't get one of the top elite quarterbacks coming out of college, they have somebody to sit behind Drew Lock for a year so they learn, which is something people seem to forget that most of the top quarterbacks did. But anyway, for now, they deserve to be at 31. And then bringing in the rear, now the new team at 32 is the Tennessee Titans. Tennessee Titans are 3-13. As I mentioned earlier when talking about Jacksonville, they have lost to Jacksonville twice in the last 4 weeks, I believe. So they, to me, have proven to be the worst team in the league. Yes, I would say that Mason Rudolph has looked better than Will Levis, but that's still not saying much because I'd say almost every quarterback in the league is better than Will Levis. Sorry. It is what it is. Their defense, I've been talking about, has been good, but I think are at the point where they've kind of given up because they can't see any production on the other side. I don't see them going anywhere. I don't see them winning week 18. So this is where they'll probably stay going into the last week and after the last week. Nothing that suggests that they could beat anybody right now. So That's why they are at the bottom at 32. So that wraps up this week's episode. I want to thank you all for tuning in. Please make sure you like and subscribe and share wherever possible. And I look forward to seeing you in the next episode. Peace.